Welcome to the Economic Bulletin here on Qnews, where we present comprehensive coverage and expert insights on the latest economic trends and developments. Welcome back. We'll start off with the United States, where job openings rose in October, reversing a trend of declining vacancies that had persisted for much of the past 2 years. The Labor Department said in its latest job openings, the number of openings on the last day of October was 7.7 million, up from a revised 7.4 million in September. Job openings, a measure of labor demand, had risen 372,000. The report attributed hurricanes and strikes distorted the labor market in October. The Biden administration has awarded over $100 billion in grants through the Inflation Reduction Act, aiming to continue clean energy deployment. A senior official stated that once funds are obligated through signed contracts, they are protected by contract law. The administration expects to exceed its goal of obligating 80% of Inflation Reduction Act funding by the end of Biden's term. The Inflation Reduction Act also includes a decade of tax incentives for clean energy, and ending these subsidies would require congressional action.
The jury heard 5 weeks of evidence, 5 weeks, after careful deliberation.
On another note, the Kremlin criticized the U.S. decision to send another $725 million weapons package to Ukraine, claiming it reflected the outgoing Biden administration's intent to prolong the war. The Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, argued that the aid would not alter the situation on the front lines. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced on Monday that the new aid would include Stinger missiles, ammunition for high-mobility artillery, rocket systems, as well as drones and landmines.
Передать слова поддержки индийскому народу в связи с пандемией, которую Индия тяжело переживает.
President-elect Donald Trump announced plans to block Nippon Steel's $15 billion bid to acquire U.S. steel, citing concerns over national security and domestic ownership. Trump declared on Truth Social that he opposes the sale of the Pittsburgh-based steelmaker to Japan's largest steel producer, calling it vital to keep U.S. steel American-owned. This marks his first public comment on the matter since winning the election. Nippon Steel, determined to finalize the deal before Trump's inauguration, has pledged $2.7 billion in investments and to maintain union jobs to strengthen U.S. industry and supply chain security. On imposing tariffs on U.S. allies, a Canadian minister reported that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau told Donald Trump that Americans would also suffer if the president-elect follows through on a plan to impose sweeping tariffs on Canadian products. Trump had threatened a 25% tariff on imports from Canada and Mexico, citing concerns over drug trafficking and migration at the borders. Trudeau emphasized the economic consequences, including price hikes on various goods such as food, clothing, and automobiles, as well as the strain on U.S. affordability. Canada is also preparing for potential retaliatory tariffs. Despite these concerns, Trump showed no indication of backing down from the threat. European Central Bank board member Piero Cipollone has warned that U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's proposed tariffs could reduce economic growth and inflation in the Eurozone. Speaking at a financial conference, Cipollone said weaker growth from U.S. trade barriers may lower demand, easing price pressures. He noted that Chinese goods redirected to Europe could also drive prices down. While some argue tariffs could raise costs due to a stronger dollar and retaliation, Cipollone believes these effects will be offset by increased U.S. energy production and discounted imports. Moreover, China has banned exports of gallium, germanium and antimony to the U.S., citing national security concerns following Washington's latest semiconductor restrictions. These materials, critical for semiconductors and military applications, will now face strict end-use reviews under Beijing's directive. China dominates global production of these minerals, accounting for 98.8% of refined gallium and 59.2% of refined germanium this year. Export limitations have already led to a 97% drop in China's antimony shipments and soaring global prices, with antimony trioxide prices surging by 228% in 2023.
The United States has introduced new restrictions on semiconductor exports to China, escalating trade tensions between the world's two largest economies. The measures target over 140 entities, prompting Beijing to vow action to protect its interests. China may respond by imposing stricter security reviews on foreign firms operating within its borders. Past actions have included blocking government purchases from certain companies and increasing scrutiny on imports during periods of heightened trade disputes. Beijing's unreliable entities list is another tool it could deploy. The list, established during earlier trade tensions, has previously been used to impose sanctions and restrict the business operations of targeted firms. China's control over rare earth minerals and critical materials provides it with additional leverage. Recent restrictions on exports of gallium, germanium, and graphite, key elements for technologies like chips and EV batteries, highlight its capacity to counteract U.S. measures. New dual-use technology controls effective December 1st add another layer of complexity. These regulations govern exports of items with both civilian and military applications, such as advanced technologies and drones. Analysts warn that escalating trade measures could increase costs for industries globally, underscoring the high stakes of this economic standoff.
And joining us from Amman is the economist Mr. Ahmed Shobeki to discuss the latest developments on the trade tensions between the United States and China, as well as the recent U.S. export restrictions on semiconductors and China's response. Welcome to the Qnews Economic Bulletin, Mr. Shobeki. Let me ask you first, how do the latest U.S. export restrictions on semiconductors differ from the previous curbs?
Greetings to you and the viewers. And I think that the war of the similar productions with the United States of America, with China, that will determine the fate of the economic war between China and the West. It is a final attempt from the West to stop the process of advancement of China in the military fields and the artificial intelligence and the IT technology. We're talking about a new package that will affect 140 Chinese entities in a very difficult moment that China imported around in 2024 around 126 million US dollar in this field, in establishing factories that are bigger in China to confront the trade war that is expected either Trump had won the presidency and the arrival of the Republic Party in the next year. And I think that China wants to exit from the fierce hegemony of the West. So we're talking about the electronic flagship that enabled the world to use a technology of a small size, either the mobile that we are using or even some of the advanced technology in the military aircraft of the fifth generation. And we are talking about the artificial intelligence. And I think that the West wish to dominate the advancements in this field and to avoid China to enter in this field through the conflict or the dominations about the manufacturing, the microchips, either the nanometer that are very fast, complicated, or to get it from the company from the South Korea or Holland, Netherlands or Taiwan. And I think there is a gap between China and these countries in producing the semi-flagships, despite the increased production of this complicated industry, that China imports around a third of the world's need of such.
Then how do you think, sir, could China respond to the new US chip curbs?
I think that China will confront such sanctions, and even when the elect President Trump returned back to the presidency in January, or through a new wave of sanctions. And I think that China is fully prepared in confronting these sanctions, and among of which is imposing the fees of selection of the Chinese importers from the West, either from Europe or the United States. And I think that there are some sort of manipulation of such sanctions, and through the third parties that might buy these machinery from the Western companies. And I think this would require an accurate follow-up of the US sanctions. And I think there is a great history of manipulation on such penalties of the Chinese firms through which they can continue.
Mr. Shobeki, how effective really are China's export restrictions on gallium, germanium and graphite as countermeasures?
I think that the restrictions are limited of the high sophisticated technological materials that enter in feeding the artificial intelligence that is relating also on some other technological stuff such as the military. To clarify, for more clarifying that the main goal from the United States to dominate the technology, that China seems is a bit retaliated in this field, and I think it is in the future would prevent China to export industries and technologies that serve several fields, and these industries are going to be limited from the Western countries that they can produce these ships. This challenge will be at stake, particularly that China announced that to reach the 7 nanometer of microchips that can be used in the electronical industries of mobiles, and I think this was a surprise for the West, as China is allocated a great budget to develop this sector, to support itself in this industry, and I think this matter is a challenge for the Western countries.
Mr. Amir Shobeki, the economist from Amman, thank you very much, sir, for joining us. And now we move on to more developments from around the world. According to a report by the Institute of International Finance, the world's debt stock surged by over $12 trillion in the first 3 quarters of 2024, reaching a record nearly $323 trillion. This was driven by lower borrowing costs and rising risk appetite. The report warned that large government deficits could push sovereign debt to nearly $130 trillion by 2028, increasing global repayment risks. It also highlighted the threat of trade tensions and supply chain disruptions, which could trigger a boom-bust cycle in sovereign debt markets and exacerbate fiscal strains due to higher interest costs. According to the China Machinery Industry Federation, in the first 10 months of the year, China's machinery industry saw a 5.5% year-on-year increase in added value. The sector experienced stable production and sales, with 59% of monitored machinery products showing output growth. Fixed asset investment in general, special and automobile equipment grew year-on-year. Machinery exports reached $710.77 billion, up 9.4%, accounting for 24.3% of China's total goods exports. The governor of the People's Bank of China said in a speech that bank has vowed to further reduce financing costs for companies and households next year. China's central bank has pledged to adopt a supportive policy stance next year, marking the latest effort by policymakers to bolster a weakening economy. Pan reiterated the central bank will step up cyclical policy adjustment, a phrase typically referring to measures to boost the slowing economy. The bank will also use various tools to keep liquidity ample and lower borrowing costs for companies and residents, he added. According to Statistics Korea, South Korea's inflation rate climbed in November to 1.5% year-on-year as the economy struggles with slowing exports. This comes after the country recorded a 45-month low in October. The figure was higher than October's inflation reading of 1.3%. The Bank of Korea said in a statement that prices had stabilized and is expected to remain stable due to declining global oil prices and subdued demand pressure. Germany's IG Metall union said that almost 100,000 Volkswagen workers staged walkouts across 9 German plants on Monday, protesting wage cuts and potential site closures. The strikes, involving morning and evening shift workers, mark a significant escalation as Volkswagen faces challenges like high production costs, weak demand, and competition from Chinese automakers. Union negotiator Thorsten Greger warned of continued protests, urging the carmaker to abandon its cost-cutting plans. IG Metall has proposed measures to save €1.5 billion, but management dismissed them as unfeasible. The Central Bank of Egypt approved an agreement to join the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System to enhance regional banking relations and strengthen economic collaboration with Africa. The payment system, which is developed by the African Export-Import Bank facilities, cross-border payments and trade transactions, reducing both costs and processing times. Deputy Governor of the Central Bank, Rami Abunega, stated that the bank's participation in the new system reflects Egypt's commitment to enhancing commercial and economic ties with countries worldwide and with African nations. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman said on Tuesday that the world is facing growing water crises, particularly droughts. He highlighted that Saudi Arabia has contributed $6 billion to support over 200 water projects globally. In his speech at the One Water Summit held in Riyadh, he emphasized that this summit reflects Saudi Arabia's commitment to addressing water scarcity, noting that it underscores the kingdom's efforts to tackle environmental challenges. Bin Salman stated that efforts are being made to find sustainable solutions to water challenges and noted that Saudi Arabia had introduced water issues to the G20 in 2020. OPEC Plus is expected to extend its oil output cuts through the first quarter of 2024 to support the market. The group, which controls about half of the global oil supply, had planned to unwind cuts through 2025. But weaker demand and rising output outside the group have pressured prices. A longer 6-month extension is unlikely. Despite the cuts, Brent crude has stayed between $70 and $80 a barrel this year. The South Korean currency fell sharply against the US dollar after President Yoon Suk-yeol declared emergency martial law. The Korean won had slid to as low as 1,441 won per dollar during the nighttime offshore trading. This came after Yoon declared martial law in a previously unannounced late-night address on Tuesday, accusing the opposition side of controlling the parliament and paralyzing the government by conducting anti-state activities. Global shares had a mixed performance as the US-China trade tensions arise. In the United States, the S&P 500 was down 0.1%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average was also down by 0.2%, while the Nasdaq Composite edged up by 0.1%. In Europe, France's CAC 40 added nearly 0.9%. Germany's DAX rose 0.7%, while Britain's FTSE 100 rose 0.6%. In Asia, Japan's benchmark Nikkei 225 jumped 1.9%, South Korea's Kospi went up 1.9%, and Hong Kong's Hang Seng added 1%, while the Shanghai Composite edged up 0.4%. These are all the news we have for now, but here's a reminder of today's key headlines. China bans mineral exports to the United States. The Institute of International Finance reports that global debt soars to $323 trillion. And Egypt joins the Pan-African payment system to boost regional banking and economic ties. That's all for today's Economic News Bulletin here on Qnews, but please stay connected for more news and updates. Thank you for joining us.